The message came on a Tuesday. It didn't arrive by radio or television. It didn't flash across the internet on news sites or social media. It arrived inside Jack Ryder's head as he was hauling a shipment of discount furniture down Interstate 80, somewhere in the dead flat gut of Nebraska. One moment he was thinking about a lukewarm cup of coffee and the ache in his lower back. The next moment a voice, colder than a tombstone in January, spoke a sentence directly into his brain. "The silence is over." Jack flinched so hard he nearly sent his 18-wheeler, a Peterbilt he called Old Bessie, careening into the ditch. His hands, calloused and thick from 20 years of gripping the wheel, clenched into white-knuckled fists. The voice wasn't a sound. It was a thought that wasn't his own. An ice cube dropped down the back of his soul. He scanned the empty fields on either side of the highway. Nothing. Just corn stubble and a sky the color of a faded bruise. Then came the second part. "The void is hungry." This time the words came with a feeling, a deep, gnawing emptiness that resonated in his stomach. It was a hunger worse than any he'd ever known, a starvation of the spirit. He saw a flash of imagery behind his eyes, a vast, starless blackness, a cosmic ocean of nothing, and something waking up within it. He slammed on the brakes. The air hissed, and Old Bessie shuddered to a halt, the trailer groaning in protest. In the sudden quiet, his own heartbeat sounded like a drum in a cathedral. He looked in his side mirror. The pickup truck that had been tailgating him for the last 10 miles was now swerving wildly. It clipped a guardrail, spun twice, and rolled into the median. A silent puff of dust and a glint of shattered glass. Up ahead, a minivan drifted slowly across 3 lanes of traffic and came to rest against the concrete divider. No screech of tires, no horn, just a gentle final crunch. The third and final sentence arrived, and this one was not a statement. It was a commandment. Consume or be consumed. And with that, the world went mad. Jack's CB radio, which had been muttering quietly, erupted into a cacophony of screams, prayers, and static. He saw people getting out of their stopped cars, their faces slack with confusion and terror. A woman in a business suit was on her knees, clawing at her own hair. A man in a baseball cap was staring up at the sky, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Jack felt a primal urge, clawing its way up his own throat. The commandment echoed in his mind, not as a threat, but as a biological imperative, as simple and undeniable as the need to breathe. He felt a sudden, bizarre craving for the light. Not food, not water. He wanted to open his mouth and drink the pale afternoon sun. He wanted to feel the photons pop on his tongue. He shook his head violently, trying to dislodge the feeling, the sheer alien wrongness of it. He looked up through his windshield. The sky was no longer a faded bruise. Something was happening to it. The blue was deepening, darkening, as if a celestial artist was pouring ink into a glass of water. And the sun, the familiar, friendly sun, was beginning to flicker. Not like a cloud was passing in front of it. It was flickering like a dying fluorescent bulb in a gas station bathroom. On, off, on, off. Each time it winked out, the world plunged into a disorienting absolute darkness for a split second. During one of those flickers of black, Jack saw it. For a fraction of a moment, the stars came out. But they weren't the familiar, friendly constellations of the Big Dipper or Orion. They were wrong. They were sharp, hostile points of light arranged in geometries that made his head ache. And they were moving. Not drifting with the slow patience of the cosmos, but swarming like angry hornets. The sun flickered back on. The wrong stars vanished. But the image was burned into his mind. Jack Ryder, a man who believed in diesel engines, cheap diners, and the simple physics of the road, understood. This wasn't a solar flare. This wasn't a mass hallucination. This was first contact. And it was not an invitation to talk. It was the starting pistol for a race he didn't understand, fired in a stadium as big as the universe itself. The rules were simple. Consume or be consumed. Humanity, all 7 billion of them, had just been pushed into the arena. And the thing in the other corner was the void itself. Dr. Aris Thorne didn't need the voice in his head to tell him something was wrong. He had been seeing it for 3 days. From his perch at the Kitt Peak National Observatory, nestled high in the Arizona desert, he had watched the universe begin to unravel. Aris was a man who lived by data, by the predictable waltz of gravity and the unwavering speed of light. His world was one of numbers and spectral analysis, a comfortable reality mapped out in parsecs and redshifts. The first anomaly had been subtle. A star, Proxima Centauri, the closest one to Earth, had simply vanished from his readings. Not dimmed, not gone supernova. It was there 1 second, a reliable pinprick of data, and gone the next, as if a cosmic editor had deleted it from existence. He spent a whole night recalibrating his equipment, convinced it was a technical glitch. It wasn't. Then the next night, the background radiation of the universe, the faint, omnipresent echo of the Big Bang, had started to fluctuate. It was supposed to be the most constant thing in the cosmos, the universe's baby picture. But it was changing, its temperature shifting by fractions of a degree in chaotic, unpredictable patterns. It was like hearing static on a radio suddenly morph into a chorus of whispers and growls. When the voice came, Aris was staring at a screen showing the light spectrum from the Andromeda Galaxy. The data was nonsensical. The light was blue shifting and red shifting, simultaneously a physical impossibility. It was as if the galaxy was both hurtling toward him and away from him at the same time. His mind, so accustomed to cosmic order, was struggling to comprehend the chaos. The silence is over. The thought was so clear, so intrusive, it made him drop his coffee mug. It shattered on the concrete floor, the sound abnormally loud in the sterile dome of the observatory. The void is hungry. He clutched his head, a wave of vertigo washing over him. He felt a profound intellectual terror. This wasn't an alien transmission. An alien signal would have a source, a direction, a frequency. This was everywhere at once. It wasn't a signal traveling through space. It was a change in the nature of space itself. Like a law of physics had been amended, a new terrifying clause added to the contract of reality. Consume or be consumed. Aris stumbled back from his console and looked out the narrow window. The sun was beginning its strange, terrifying flicker. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core what was happening. For centuries, humanity had been shouting into the cosmic darkness, sending out radio waves and probes, screaming, "Are we alone?" They had been operating under the assumption that the silence was empty. They were wrong. The silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. It was a state of being, a truce, a cosmic agreement to not draw attention to oneself. And humanity, in its boisterous, lonely arrogance, had just broken the truce. The signal, as he was already calling it in his mind, wasn't a message sent to them. It was a universal status update. The rules of the game had changed for everyone, everywhere. Miles away in the quiet suburban house in Flagstaff, Maria Sanchez felt the words as she was making her son's lunch. She was slicing a tomato, the red flesh yielding under the knife, when the first sentence hit her. She froze, the knife hovering over the cutting board. Her first thought was that she was having a stroke. Her mother had died of an aneurysm, a sudden thunderclap in the brain. The second sentence, the one about the hungry void, made her drop the knife. It clattered to the floor. She felt an echo of that hunger in her own belly, a phantom craving that had nothing to do with food. Her 7-year-old son Leo was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring in a picture of a dinosaur. He didn't seem to notice. When the third sentence came, the commandment, Maria gasped and grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her gaze fell on Leo. He was still coloring, but he had stopped using his green crayon. He had picked up a black one and was scribbling furiously over the brontosaurus, covering the gentle herbivore in a thick, dark shroud of wax. "Leo," she said, her voice trembling. He looked up, his eyes, usually a warm chocolate brown, seemed darker, deeper. He wasn't scared. He was just listening. "They're loud, Mummy," he said, his voice flat. "Who's loud, honey?" "The new things," he said, and went back to his coloring, pressing down so hard with the black crayon that the paper began to tear. Outside, the sun flickered. In the brief moment of darkness, the streetlights all came on at once with an audible hum. Then the sun was back and the streetlights were off again. A car alarm started blaring down the street. Then another, then a third, until the quiet suburban afternoon was filled with a symphony of electronic panic. Maria ran to the front window and peered through the blinds. Her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was standing on his perfect green lawn, turning a slow circle, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Across the street, the Garcetti's garage door was opening and closing with a rhythmic, grinding groan. The world had not ended. It had just been given a new set of instructions. Aris Thorne, in his lonely observatory, saw it in his data. Maria Sanchez saw it in her son's eyes and the malfunctioning world. Outside her window, humanity had spent its entire existence playing checkers. And someone had just flipped the board and announced the real game was three-dimensional, cosmic chess. And they didn't even know how the pieces moved. A week after the signal, the world was a scrapyard of broken routines. Planes were grounded. The internet was a ghost town of frozen homepages and error messages. Power grids flickered, delivering electricity in stuttering, unpredictable bursts. The world hadn't ended in a bang, but in a million small, maddening failures. The laws of physics had become suggestions, not rules. For Jack Ryder, this meant the road was a different kind of beast. He was still driving because that's what he did. He drove. But now the asphalt wasn't always solid. He'd seen it with his own eyes. A stretch of highway near Des Moines had turned to a shimmering liquid-like substance for a full minute, causing a pileup of a dozen cars before hardening back into pavement. He'd learned to trust old Bessie's tires more than his own eyes. He was running low on diesel and food. He pulled into a truck stop in eastern Colorado, a place he'd been to 100 times before. The big neon sign that said "Eat" was flickering erratically, sometimes spelling 8, or just a single, ominous E. Most of the pumps were dry, but he found one that still had a trickle of fuel. As he filled his tank, he watched the other people moving around the lot. They were different. They moved with a new kind of purpose, a twitchy, predatory awareness. Their eyes darted everywhere. A man filling a thermos with water from an outdoor spigot suddenly stopped and tilted his head, as if listening to something far away. Then he looked at the water spigot with a strange intensity, a look of profound, almost religious desire. Inside the diner, the air was thick with tension. The few people there didn't talk. They ate with a grim efficiency, their eyes scanning the room. Jack ordered a coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. The coffee tasted wrong. It tasted thin, as if the water itself was losing its ability to hold flavor. The eggs were rubbery, but he ate them anyway. Calories were calories. Then he saw it. A man sitting in a booth by the window was stirring his coffee. Nothing strange about that. But he wasn't stirring it with a spoon. He was just staring at it. And the coffee was swirling in the cup, creating a perfect tiny whirlpool. The man's focus was absolute. He didn't blink. The coffee swirled faster and faster, climbing the sides of the mug. Jack felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The commandment echoed in his memory. Consume. This man was consuming something, not the coffee, the energy, the heat, the simple kinetic motion. Jack could almost see faint wisps of steam being drawn from the cups of other patrons, pulled invisibly across the room to feed the man's swirling vortex. The temperature in the diner dropped by a few degrees. No one else seemed to notice, or if they did, they were trying very hard not to. This was the new normal. Pretend you don't see the impossible thing happening 3 feet away from you. As Jack was paying, a commotion started outside. He pushed through the door and saw 2 men arguing over a can of gasoline. One man was big, a biker with a leather vest and a thick beard. The other was small and wiry, in a grease-stained jumpsuit. "I found it first," the wiry man squeaked. "It's mine now," the biker grunted. He reached out to grab the can. The wiry man did something Jack could not have predicted. He didn't fight back. He didn't run. He opened his mouth and he inhaled. It wasn't a normal breath. It was a deep, resonant intake of air that made a sound like a vacuum cleaner being switched on. The biker, who was a foot taller and twice as wide, stumbled forward. His leather vest fluttered. His beard was drawn toward the wiry man's mouth. The biker's face went from anger to confusion to sheer, abject terror as he felt the strength being pulled out of him. He grew visibly paler. His muscular arms went limp. He dropped to his knees, gasping, his skin suddenly loose and sallow. The wiry man, meanwhile, seemed to swell. A healthy flush returned to his cheeks. He stood up straighter. He had consumed the biker's vitality, his life force, as easily as drinking a glass of water. He took the gas can, gave the whimpering man on the ground a dismissive kick, and walked away. Jack got back in his truck, his hands shaking. He had seen the swirling coffee, a parlor trick. This was different. This was violence. This was the food chain reasserting itself with new, terrifying rules. The strong didn't just take from the weak anymore, they fed on them. He pulled old Bessie back onto the highway, the setting sun flickering in the sky. The world was changing, adapting to the new commandment. And humanity was changing with it. People were discovering latent abilities, a dark new potential that had been sleeping inside them all along. The signal hadn't introduced something new to the world. It had just unlocked a door that was always there. And Jack was beginning to understand that monsters weren't coming from the stars. They were sitting in diners, fighting over gasoline, and driving the truck in the next lane. The hunger in Flagstaff had a sound. It was the low, persistent hum of refrigerators working overtime, trying to cool food that spoiled too quickly. It was the frantic buzz of flies that now seemed to multiply in seconds. For Maria Sanchez, the hunger was in the silence of her neighbors. The Garcetti's garage door had finally stopped its manic dance. Now, their house was just dark, quiet, too quiet. Leo was the one who felt it most acutely. "They're getting hungry, Mummy," he would whisper at night, huddled under his blankets. He no longer drew dinosaurs. He drew stick figures with gaping mouths and long, grasping arms. He drew houses that looked like they were leaning in, trying to swallow the street. The change wasn't just in people, it was in things. Food rotted in hours. A carton of milk Maria bought in the morning was a block of sour cheese by the afternoon. An apple left on the counter would wrinkle and decay, its life energy seemingly sucked out of it by the air itself. The world was developing an appetite. Maria was trying to keep things normal for Leo, a task that grew more impossible every day. One afternoon, she was in the backyard with him, trying to get a little sun during a period when it wasn't flickering. Leo was pushing a toy truck through the patchy grass. Maria was watching the rose bush her husband had planted before he died. The roses, which had been beautiful crimson blooms 2 days ago, were now withered and gray, their petals like dried ash. As she watched, one of the thorny vines began to move. It wasn't swaying in the wind. It was inching, deliberate and slow, like a green snake, across the lawn. It stretched, the thorns scraping against the dirt, reaching for a small puddle of water left over from a brief, unnatural rain shower that had tasted of metal. The vine dipped its tip into the water, and the puddle sizzled and vanished in a wisp of steam. The vine visibly plumped up, its gray color receding, replaced by a vibrant, healthy green. It had drunk the water. Maria snatched Leo up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Inside now?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. That night, the real horror began. She was woken by a scraping sound from next door, Mr. Henderson's house. She crept to the window and looked out. In the flickering moonlight, she saw him. Mr. Henderson, the kind old man who always waved, was on his hands and knees on his own front porch. He was licking the paint off his house. His tongue, impossibly long and gray, rasped against the wood siding, peeling off long strips of white paint, which he swallowed with a gulping, ecstatic greed. He wasn't eating the wood. He was consuming the concept of white, the color. As he licked, the wood underneath was left a dull, lifeless gray, the color of absolute absence. He was draining the property of its pigment, and as he did, he seemed to glow with a faint, internal luminescence. Maria backed away from the window, her hand clapped over her mouth to stifle a scream. The commandment: consume, or be consumed. Mr. Henderson had found his niche in the new ecology. He was a color eater. The next day she knew they had to leave. The suburbs, once a symbol of safety, were now a hunting ground, filled with neighbors indulging in alien appetites. She packed a bag with what little non-perishable food she had, a few bottles of water, and Leo's favorite blanket. The plan was simple and desperate. Get in the car and drive. Drive anywhere that wasn't here. As they were leaving, she saw Mrs. Garcetti from across the street. She was standing perfectly still on her lawn, her arms held out to her sides. She was rail-thin, her skin stretched tight over her bones. But the thing that made Maria's blood run cold was her shadow. It was wrong. The sun was high in the sky, so her shadow should have been small and directly beneath her. Instead, it was long and impossibly dark, stretching all the way across the street, a hungry black tendril that was slowly, painstakingly creeping up the side of a fire hydrant. As Maria watched, the bright red of the hydrant began to fade where the shadow touched it, turning a washed-out, anemic pink. Mrs. Garcetti was drinking the color, just like Mr. Henderson, but from a distance. Maria shoved Leo into the back seat of her beat-up Honda and peeled out of the driveway. As she drove, she saw other things. A woman talking to a telephone pole, her hands pressed against it, the pole vibrating with a low hum. A teenage boy lying on the sidewalk, his mouth pressed to a crack, seemingly inhaling the darkness from it. Everyone was finding a way to feed the new hunger. Everyone was adapting. She looked at Leo in the rearview mirror. He was quiet, his dark eyes watching the strange world go by. He wasn't hungry like the others. He was something different. He was calm. In a world screaming with new, terrifying energies, Leo was a pocket of silence. And Maria realized, with a new kind of fear, that in a cosmos where the loudest new rule was consume, the most dangerous thing you could be was food. Her only job now was to make sure no one realized her son was a feast. The voice on the radio was a miracle. It was tinny, shot through with static, but it was there. Jack had been fiddling with the dial on his CB for days, getting nothing but bursts of noise and the occasional terrified whimper. But now, a human voice was cutting through the chaos. Repeat. This is a broadcast from Haven. If you can hear this, there is hope. We have established a safe zone. The phenomena are weaker here. The rules are different. We have power, we have water. We are located at the old mining community of Blackwood, Colorado. Follow the signs for Route 7. We are waiting. You are not alone. Haven. The word was like a drink of cool water in a desert. A safe zone. A place where the world hadn't gone completely insane. Jack felt a surge of purpose. He hadn't felt since the signal hit. He wasn't just driving anymore. He was driving to somewhere. He checked his map. Blackwood, Colorado. It was a ghost town in the mountains, but it was only a day's drive away. The landscape he drove through was a Dali painting come to life. Trees drooped, their leaves the color of rust, as if the chlorophyll was being sucked out of them. Rocks by the side of the road seemed to subtly shift and rearrange themselves when he wasn't looking directly at them. The world was sick, running a fever, and he was driving through its fever dream. He saw the car on the side of the road an hour later. An old Honda, its hood up, a plume of steam rising into the flickering sky. A woman and a small boy were standing beside it, looking lost and vulnerable. Jack was not a man who stopped for people anymore. The new world made good Samaritans into easy prey. But something about the look on the woman's face, a fierce, desperate protection of her child, reminded him of his late wife, Sarah. He pulled old Bessie over with a sigh of grinding gears. The woman was Maria, the boy was Leo. Their car was dead. Not just out of gas or overheated, the engine block had a strange porous texture, like a sponge. The metal itself seemed to have decayed from the inside out. "Need a ride?" Jack asked, leaning out of his window. Maria looked at him, her eyes full of suspicion. She held Leo tighter. "Where are you going?" "Place called Haven. Up in the mountains." Heard it on the radio. Hope flickered in her eyes, warring with the fear. "You heard a radio?" "Clear as a bell for a minute there. Said it was safe." She looked at her dead car, then at the desolate, predatory landscape around them. She looked at Jack's tired, honest face. She made a decision. "Okay," she said. "We'll go with you." Climbing into the cab of the big rig was like entering a different world. It smelled of diesel, coffee, and worn leather. It was a space that still felt sane, a bubble of the old world. Leo looked around with wide, curious eyes. Maria sat rigidly in the passenger seat, a bundle of nervous energy. "I am Jack," he said, putting the truck in gear. They drove in silence for a while, the rumble of the engine a comforting constant. "What did you see?" Jack finally asked, not looking at her. "Back there, in your town." Maria shuddered. "My neighbors. They were eating things, not food. One was licking the paint of his house. Another was, her shadow was drinking the color out of a fire hydrant." Jack nodded slowly. "Sounds about right. Saw a man suck the life out of another man at a truck stop. Saw a puddle of coffee turn into a whirlpool by itself." They were quiet again, sharing the camaraderie of the sane in an insane world. The world was broken, but they weren't. Not yet. Jack glanced at him in the mirror. "Happy?" "It likes driving," Leo said simply. "It doesn't like stopping. The stopping makes the hungry things notice." Jack frowned. It was a strange thing for a kid to say, but it felt true. Old Bessie did feel better when she was moving, when her engine was turning diesel into miles. When she was still, the quiet felt heavy, dangerous. As dusk fell, the flickering of the sun grew more pronounced. During the moments of total darkness, the wrong stars burned brightly in the sky, their alien constellations seeming to mock the familiar patterns of Earth. Jack turned on his headlights. The beams cut through the gloom, but the light seemed sickety. It didn't travel as far as it used to. It was as if the darkness was pushing back, a tangible substance that had to be shouldered aside. As they rounded a bend, they saw it. In the valley below, a collection of lights twinkled. A town, not flickering, not stuttering, just steady welcoming lights. It looked like a Christmas card. It looked like salvation. Maria let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Leo pressed his face against the window, his expression unreadable, but Jack felt a prickle of unease. It looked too perfect, too normal. In this new world, normal was the most suspicious thing of all. The road into Haven was clear, too clear. The strange crystalline fungus that was eating the road signs vanished the moment they passed a simple, hand-painted sign that said, "Welcome to Haven. Leave the madness behind." The asphalt became smooth and dark. The trees lining the road were green and healthy. It was as if they had crossed an invisible line into the world that was. "See?" Maria said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. "It's real. It's safe." Jack grunted, his hands tight on the wheel. He didn't like it. The world didn't just stop being monstrous at a town line. It felt like walking into a room that had just been tidied up, with the dust swept under the rug. You couldn't see the mess, but you knew it was there. The town of Blackwood was a small collection of old brick buildings and wooden houses, nestled in a mountain valley. The lights they'd seen from the road came from strings of outdoor bulbs. Like a permanent street festival, people were walking around. They were smiling. They were talking to each other. A group of kids was kicking a soccer ball in a small park. It was a scene of impossible normalcy. As Jack parked Old Bessie on the main street, a man walked out to greet them. He was tall, with a warm, easy smile and startlingly blue eyes. He wore simple, clean clothes. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I am Silas. Welcome to Haven." "You are the one on the radio?" Jack asked, climbing down from the cab. "I am," Silas said. "We've been blessed here. The chaos of the outside world, it doesn't touch us. The signal's voice is just a whisper here." Maria got out, holding Leo's hand. She looked at Silas with gratitude. "Thank you. We saw terrible things." Silas's smile was full of sympathy. "I know. The world has succumbed to the hunger. But there is another way. Here, we've learned to harmonize, not consume. We share our energy, we reinforce reality. We hold the madness at bay." It sounded good. It sounded like everything Jack had hoped for. But as Silas spoke, Jack watched his eyes. They were a little too bright. His smile was a little too wide. And when he looked at Leo, his gaze lingered for a moment too long, a flicker of something that wasn't warmth. It was assessment. They were shown to a small clean room in what used to be the town's hotel. There was fresh water in a pitcher and a plate of bread and cheese on the table. The bread tasted like bread. The water tasted like bread. The water tasted like water. It was the most wonderful meal Jack had had in weeks. But Leo wouldn't eat. He sat on the bed, clutching his blanket, his eyes wide and wary. "What's wrong, honey?" Maria asked, stroking his hair. "It's safe here." "No," Leo whispered. "It's not quiet, it's loud, just pretending to be quiet." Later that evening, Silas called a town meeting in the old town hall. Everyone gathered, their faces serene and attentive. Jack and Maria stood at the back, feeling like outsiders. Silas stood on a small stage, bathed in the warm glow of oil lamps. "Friends," he began, his voice echoing in the hall, "we have new arrivals. They have seen the chaos. They have seen the hunger. They have seen humanity devouring itself, succumbing to the primal command of the void." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But we have rejected that command." The signal told us to consume. But it also told us the silence is over. That means we can make our own noise. We can create our own signal. A signal of order, of community, of strength. The crowd murmured in agreement. "We do not consume each other," Silas continued, his voice rising with passion. "We do not consume the world. We channel the energy of the cosmos itself. We have learned to drink from the river, not from the puddles." He raised his hands. "The void is hungry, yes, so we will feed it. Not ourselves, not our world. We will feed it the chaos. We will focus the madness and cast it out. And in doing so, we create this space, this sanctuary of calm." Jack frowned. It sounded like nonsense. How do you feed the void? Then, Silas looked directly at them. Directly at Leo. "And now, we have been blessed with a gift. A new source. A young one, pure and bright. A wellspring of the old world's calm. He will help us strengthen our shield. He will help us secure haven for eternity." The smiling faces of the townsfolk all turned toward them. Their smiles didn't change, but their eyes were different now. They were hungry. Not for food or color or life force. They were hungry for Leo's silence. They wanted to consume his normalcy to fuel their perfect little town. Jack grabbed Maria's arm. "We have to go. Now." Haven wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap. It wasn't a place that was immune to the new rules. It was a place that had mastered them. They weren't fighting the madness. They were harnessing it. And they had just found a brand new battery. The escape from Haven was a frantic, clumsy burst of adrenaline. Jack didn't hesitate. The moment Silas pointed at Leo, Jack grabbed Maria's hand and pulled her toward the exit. "Move," he yelled, his voice cutting through the serene atmosphere of the town hall. The smiling faces of the Havenites turned on them, their expressions shifting from placid welcome to a cold, focused intent. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They just started moving, converging on the door with a silent, coordinated purpose that was more terrifying than any angry mob. Jack shoved his way through, a shoulder-first tackle that sent a few of the cultists stumbling. He, Maria, and Leo burst out into the night air. The street, which had seemed so charming before, now felt like the floor of a cage. The string lights cast long, dancing shadows. "The truck!" Jack yelled, and they sprinted toward where he'd parked old Bessie. Silas's voice boomed out from the town hall, amplified by some unseen force. "Don't let them leave. The boy is the key. He will anchor us." The townsfolk moved faster now. A man who had been a smiling baker an hour ago now ran with an unnatural speed, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. A woman pointed a finger at the truck, and one of old Bessie's tires hissed and deflated instantly. They weren't just people, they were conduits for the new twisted laws of the universe. Jack bundled Maria and Leo into the cab. "Hold on," he roared, turning the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. Leo was right. The truck was happy to be moving. He slammed the truck into gear. With a lurch, old Bessie pulled away from the curb, grinding on the rim of the flattened tire. Silas was standing in the middle of the road now, his arms outstretched. "You cannot fight order, Jack Ryder," he called out. "You are choosing chaos. You are choosing to be consumed." "Get out of the way!" Jack screamed, but Silas didn't move. Behind Silas, the very air began to shimmer and warp. The road buckled. The bricks of the building next to them began to flow like liquid, reshaping themselves into a solid wall that blocked the street. They were trying to box him in. "They're bending it," Maria whispered in horror. "They're bending the world." Jack didn't have time for physics. He had the wheel. He swerved old Bessie onto the sidewalk, crashing through the tables of an outdoor cafe. China shattered. Wooden chairs splintered under the massive tires. He was aiming for the gap between two buildings, a narrow alley he'd noticed when they arrived. As they barreled toward the alley, a group of Havenites linked hands across the entrance. They closed their eyes. The air between them grew thick, visible like heat haze. They were creating a barrier, a wall of pure force. Jack wasn't going to stop. He floored the accelerator. "Leo, close your eyes," he shouted. But Leo didn't close his eyes. He was staring at the shimmering wall, his small face intense. He put his hand on the dashboard. "No," he said, his voice small but firm. "Be quiet." For a split second, everything changed. The shimmering force wall didn't break. It just faded. It dissolved into nothing. The townsfolk who had been creating it cried out, stumbling back as if they'd received an electric shock. The unnatural hum that had filled the air vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound silence. Jack didn't question it. He steered old Bessie into the alley. The truck's sides scraped against the brick walls with a deafening screech of metal on stone. Mirrors shattered, paint scraped away, but they were through. They burst out onto a back road and sped away from the twinkling lights of Haven. In the rearview mirror, Jack could see Silas standing there, staring after them, his face no longer smiling. It was a mask of cold fury. They drove for an hour in silence, the truck limping on its flat tire. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice shaking. "What did you do, Leo?" Leo was just looking out the window at the dark, twisted trees of the real world. "They were too loud," he said. "I told them to be quiet. So they were." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The people of Haven could warp reality. They could channel the chaotic energy of the new cosmos. They were powerful. And Leo, a 7-year-old boy, had just turned them off like a light switch. In a universe that had suddenly become a screaming madhouse, he was the only one who knew how to say, "Hush." Jack looked at the road ahead, at the flickering sky and the hostile darkness. They had escaped the trap of Haven, but they were no closer to being safe. They were fugitives now, running from people who had embraced the madness. And they were carrying the one thing that could stop it all. A small boy in the passenger seat who was more powerful than any of them could possibly understand. High in his lonely observatory, Aris Thorne was dying. It wasn't the hunger that was killing him, or some strange new cosmic disease. It was knowledge. His body was failing under the strain of a mind that was trying to process the raw, unfiltered truth of the new universe. His hair had gone white. His hands trembled ceaselessly. He lived on stale crackers and cold coffee, rarely sleeping, his eyes glued to his monitors. He had abandoned the telescopes. Looking out at the sky was pointless now. The stars were liars. The data was a flood of contradictions. The truth wasn't out there. He had realized, with a flash of terrifying insight, that the source of the signal was much, much closer. He had jury-rigged his equipment, turning the massive radio dishes not toward the heavens but inward. He used them to scan the Earth itself, to listen to the planet's new, chaotic biosignature. He was tracking the outbreaks of reality bending, the spikes of energy consumption, the places where the laws of physics were fraying the most. He was mapping the madness. His screen was a map of the world, dotted with pulsing, angry red lights. Each light was a haven, a place like Blackwood, where people were learning to channel the chaos. Or it was a place of extreme consumption, a town where someone was eating the sound or drinking the gravity. The world was a Jackson Pollock painting of horror. But there was a pattern. Aris, for all the chaos, was a man who saw patterns. The signal hadn't been a uniform blast. It had originated from somewhere. It had a point of origin, an epicenter. And after weeks of cross-referencing data, triangulating energy spikes, and running simulations that made his computers smoke, he had found it. The epicenter wasn't in deep space. It wasn't a pulsar, or a black hole, or some alien world. It was us. The signal had erupted from the collective subconscious of the human race. The truth hit Aris with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back from his screen, gasping for air. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. For millennia, humanity had been evolving, its consciousness growing more complex. 7 billion minds, all dreaming, hoping, fearing, and feeling profoundly, cosmically alone. They had been a psychic powder keg, a latent potential of unimaginable power, waiting for a spark. And that spark had finally come. Some unknown threshold had been crossed. The shared, silent scream of, "Are we alone?" had become so powerful that it had torn a hole in the fabric of reality. Humanity hadn't received a message. It had sent one. The silence is over. That was humanity announcing its presence to a cosmos that had, until now, operated on a don't ask, don't tell policy. The void is hungry. That was the collective, bottomless ache of human loneliness and desire given form. Consume or be consumed. That wasn't a threat from an alien predator. It was the fundamental, biological, and now cosmic, law of survival unleashed from the deepest, most primitive parts of the human brain. We weren't the victims of a cosmic war. We were the ones who had declared it. We were the invading species. Not in spaceships, but in consciousness. We had kicked down the door to the universe's quiet library and started screaming, tearing pages out of the books of physics. Aris looked at his trembling hands. The power to warp reality, to consume energy, to rewrite the world. It wasn't an alien gift. It was a human birthright that had just been activated. Silas and his cult in Haven weren't deviants. They were the next step in human evolution. a terrifyingly logical adaptation to the new reality we had created. He felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest. His heart fluttered like a trapped bird. He knew he didn't have much time. He had to tell someone. But who? And how? The communications networks were shot. He stumbled over to a dusty old shortwave radio, a relic from a simpler time. He started tinkering with it, channeling the observatory's massive power supply into the small device. He had to try. He had to get the truth out. With his last ounce of strength, he calibrated the frequency, bypassing the new atmospheric chaos by pure, brute force. He didn't know if the signal would even get out of the valley, let alone reach anyone who would understand. But he had to try. He grabbed the microphone, his knuckles white. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne at Kit Peak," he rasped, his voice a dry, cracking whisper. "If anyone can hear me, you have to understand. The enemy isn't out there." He took a shuddering breath, the room starting to spin. "It's not aliens. It's not the void. It's us. It has always been us. We broke the silence. We woke up and we screamed. We are the monsters." He slumped forward, his head hitting the console. The microphone fell from his hand, clattering to the floor. The shortwave radio hissed, sending his last, desperate message out into a world that was busy tearing itself apart. A world that was finally, terrifyingly, not alone. The shortwave radio in old Bessie's cab crackled to life. It was a fluke, a 1 in a billion chance. A specific atmospheric condition, the truck's position in a mountain pass, and the sheer power of Aris Thorne's desperate broadcast, all converged. "Enemy isn't out there. It's us. We broke the silence. We are the monsters." The voice was weak, gasping, and then it cut out, replaced by static. But the words hung in the cab, colder and sharper than the mountain air. Jack stared at the radio. Maria looked at him, her face pale. What did that mean? "We are the monsters." Jack didn't answer. He was looking in the rearview mirror at Leo. The boy was asleep, his head resting against the window. He looked so small, so innocent. But the voice on the radio cast a new, terrible light on everything. The hunger, the reality bending, Silas's cult. It wasn't an invasion, it was an awakening. A terrible, chaotic birth. And Leo. He wasn't just a boy who could make things quiet. If the power came from humanity, then Leo's ability wasn't an antidote to the madness. It was a part of it. A different expression of the same fundamental power. Not consumption but control. Not chaos but order. A self-correction mechanism, maybe. The thought was interrupted by a grinding, tearing sound from outside. Jack slammed on the brakes. Up ahead, the road was gone. Not washed out or broken. It had been peeled back like the lid of a tin can. The asphalt and dirt curled up into the sky, revealing the raw gray bedrock beneath. And standing on that bedrock was Silas. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a dozen of his followers from Haven. They must have followed them, their unnatural abilities making a mockery of distance. "There is nowhere to run, Jack Ryder," Silas's voice echoed. Not through the air, but directly in their minds, clearer and more powerful than before. He had learned from his last encounter, the world is ours to shape, and we need the boy. Jack put old Bessie in reverse, but the road behind them was sealing itself up. Trees bent and intertwined, their branches weaving together into an impassable living wall. They were trapped. Give us the boy, Maria. Silas's mind voice said, softer now, aimed at her. He will be safe. He will be revered. He will be the anchor that saves us all from the chaos you see. Maria clutched Leo, who was now awake and watching the scene with his unnervingly calm eyes. Never, she breathed. Then you have chosen to be consumed, Silas declared. He raised a hand, and the ground under the truck began to shake. The metal of old Bessie groaned, beginning to warp and twist under an immense, unseen pressure. Get out! Jack yelled. He kicked his door open and half pulled, half threw Maria and Leo out onto the vibrating ground. They scrambled away from the truck just as it collapsed in on itself with a horrific shriek of tortured metal, the engine block crushing, the trailer folding like an accordion. Old Bessie, Jack's home, and his last connection to the old world, was dead. Silas and his followers advanced slowly, their feet not touching the ground, hovering an inch above the bedrock. It's over, Silas said. Join us. Embrace your potential. You have the power too, Jack. You just refuse to use it. You cling to the old ways to weakness.
Jack felt it then, a flicker of the hunger inside him.
The temptation to reach out, to consume, to fight back with their own weapons. He could feel the energy in the rocks beneath his feet, the kinetic potential in the wind. He could take it. He could use it. He looked at Leo. The boy was watching him, his expression one of simple trust. He wasn't afraid of Silas. He was watching Jack. And Jack made a choice. He was Jack Ryder, a truck driver. He solved problems with his hands and his wits, not by eating the sky. He would not become one of them. Leo, Jack said, his voice low and steady. You said you can make them quiet. Can you make them loud? Leo tilted his head, considering the question, loud. Their power, Jack said, pointing at Silas. It's a signal, right? You turn it off. Can you turn it all the way up? A slow understanding dawned on Leo's face. He looked at Silas, who was now only 20 feet away, his hand outstretched to take him. Leo nodded. I think so. Do it, Jack said. Leo closed his eyes. He didn't say be loud. He just let go. He released the quiet control he unconsciously exerted on the world around him, and at the same time he pushed. He took the chaotic energy that Silas and his followers were channeling and amplified it, fed it back to them in an overwhelming, unfiltered torrent. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Silas screamed, a real human scream of agony. The serene confidence on his face shattered, replaced by pure terror. The power he was so carefully controlling had turned on him. His body began to flicker like a bad television signal. The other Havenites convulsed, dropping to the ground. They were getting exactly what they wanted. A direct connection to the cosmic energy, but it was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The world around them dissolved into chaos. The rocks melted. The trees thrashed and tore themselves apart. The very air crackled with raw, uncontrolled power. Run! Jack yelled, grabbing Maria's hand. They scrambled away from the epicenter of the psychic storm, back toward the living wall of trees. The wall was dissolving now, its constituent parts no longer under any control. They plunged into the forest as behind them. The clearing where Silas had made his stand erupted in a silent, blinding flash of white light. Then there was nothing. Just a crater of smoking, glassy rock. Jack, Maria, and Leo collapsed at the edge of the woods, breathing heavily, their ears ringing with a profound silence. The monsters were gone. For now, They hadn't been defeated by a bigger monster. They had been drowned in their own power. Leo had not consumed them. He had made them consume themselves. They walked for 2 days. The forest was a twisted, nightmarish landscape. Trees grew in spirals. Moss pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. The streams ran uphill. The world was still broken, still running its cosmic fever. But Jack, Maria, and Leo walked through it like ghosts. The immediate area around them seemed calmer. The worst of the chaos held at bay by Leo's mere presence. He was a walking bubble of the old reality. They didn't talk much. The death of old Bessie had hit Jack harder than he'd expected. It was more than a truck. It was the last piece of the world that made sense. Aris Thorne's words echoed in his head. We are the monsters. He looked at Maria, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. He looked at Leo, a small boy, who could unmake a man with a thought. They were all monsters now, just different kinds. On the 3rd day, they stumbled out of the woods and onto a highway. It was cracked and overgrown, littered with the husks of dead cars. But it was a road, a path. What do we do now? Maria asked, her voice raspy. Where do we go? Before, the answer had been Haven, a place of false hope. Now, there was no destination. There were no more safe zones to believe in. There were only other people, other burgeoning gods and devils, discovering their own appetites. Jack looked up at the sky. It was a churning, bruised purple. The sun a weak flickering bulb. The universe felt alien and hostile. A place humanity was not welcome. But that wasn't true, was it? The universe wasn't hostile. It had just been minding its own business. Humanity was the loud, obnoxious neighbor, who had just moved in and started a war with the very concept of silence. We keep moving, Jack said. It was the only answer he had. It was the only thing he knew how to do. He found a car with a key still in the ignition. It was an old station wagon, big and ugly, but the engine miraculously turned over. The gas tank was half full. It was enough. As they drove, the world scrolled by. They saw a flock of birds flying in a perfect crystalline cube formation. They saw a river that had turned to shimmering silver dust. They saw a man sitting cross-legged on a hilltop, slowly and methodically eating the clouds. This was the world now. Leo was in the back seat humming to himself. The humming seemed to smooth out the road in front of them, to keep the engine running steadily. He wasn't a weapon, he was a shield, a harmonizer. In a world of consumers and cannibals, he was a creator of a fragile, localized peace. Maria finally looked at Jack. That man on the radio. If he was right, then this is our fault. All of it. Yep, Jack said, his eyes on the road. Looks like it. So this doesn't end, she said. It wasn't a question. People will just get more powerful. The fighting will get worse. The world will just break. Maybe, Jack said. Or maybe people will learn, like Leo. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Leo was not consuming. He was not destroying. He was balancing. He was the opposite of the hunger. He was something else. Satiety, maybe control. They drove into the sunset. The flickering light cast long, monstrous shadows. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Humanity was a race of newborns, screaming and flailing with godlike power, just now realizing they were all in the same crib. They could tear each other apart, or they could learn to quiet down. Jack Ryder, the man who had only ever wanted to drive his truck, was now the guardian of a boy who might be the only thing standing between humanity and total, self-inflicted annihilation. He had no map. He had no destination. All he had was a half-tank of gas and a fragile bubble of quiet in a universe that was screaming. The silence was over. The command to consume was ringing in the mind of every human on the planet. But as he drove the ugly station wagon down the broken highway, with a terrified mother beside him and a boy of impossible power humming in the back, Jack Ryder had a new thought, one that was entirely his own. The silence is over, but maybe, just maybe, we can learn to whisper.